They were still laughing when I stepped forward. The command room at Camp Ridgeline, Nevada, hummed with fluorescent lights and the low hiss of radios. 12 officers stood around the glowing map table, arguing over evacuation routes like it was just another exercise. Red civilian markers blinked across the screen. Two teams already marked lost because of one bad decision. Still, no one wanted to listen. Behind me, someone whispered, "Relax, Staff Sergeant, we've got it." Staff Sergeant, that's what they had called me all week. Like I was there to carry folders. Like I didn't belong in the room where decisions mattered. Major Cole Barrett kept talking, voice loud, confident, certain enough to be wrong. I waited. Let the noise fade. Let the moment settle. Then I spoke, calm and steady. "Unless you outrank a Navy SEAL commander, you will follow my plan." Silence fell hard. No laughter, no movement. Just 12 officers staring, realizing too late they had misjudged the quiet soldier in the room. And in that silence, everything changed. Subscribe to my channel, Lady Veteran Stories, for more real military stories, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. My name is Lieutenant Commander Savannah Reese, Naval Special Warfare. Before any of them ever wore command stars in training, I had already led a SEAL element in places where mistakes were not erased by a reset button. The year was 2016. I had just come off a long deployment in Eastern Africa. We lost one operator on that rotation. We pulled 9 civilians out alive. Some missions fade with time. That one never did. It stayed in the quiet parts of my mind, where every decision still echoes. Camp Ridgeline sat far outside a small Nevada town called Dry Creek Junction, surrounded by empty desert and restless wind. Dust moved across the ground like smoke. The base specialized in advanced leadership simulations for officers preparing to step into higher command, controlled chaos, artificial pressure, digital casualties instead of real ones. But pressure reveals truth, even in a simulation. I was not there to learn, I was there to observe. The assignment came directly from Naval Special Warfare Command. Quiet concerns had surfaced across multiple joint operations. Some officers, it seemed, treated enlisted personnel as background noise rather than part of the team. Advice ignored, warnings dismissed, listening replaced by rank. That kind of mindset does not stay inside a classroom. One day it walks onto a battlefield. So they placed me inside the course without announcement, no recognition. No introduction, no visible authority, just another uniform among many. I removed my commander insignia. No rank tabs, no decorations, nothing that suggested leadership. On my chest sat a simple staff sergeant patch. I said nothing. Let them decide who I was. Major Cole Barrett ran the program. Tall, confident, precise in movement and speech. A West Point graduate with a reputation for fast decision-making. He greeted everyone firmly, voice steady, posture sharp, but his eyes rarely dropped below someone's collar. Rank spoke louder to him than presence. Captain Ryan DeLuca followed close behind. Intelligent, disciplined, eager to prove himself. He watched Barrett constantly, mirroring his tone, his posture, even his pauses. Not arrogance, just inexperience mixed with ambition. There were 9 others, different branches, different backgrounds, some sharp, some cautious, most professional. But leadership culture does not come from individuals alone. It flows from the tone set at the top, and from the first morning briefing, I felt it. During role-play exercises, junior voices were interrupted. Suggestions brushed aside before being fully spoken. When stress increased, listening decreased. Orders replaced dialogue. Authority replaced awareness. I watched quietly. I listened carefully. I measured everything. On the second day, during a logistics planning drill, I saw a gap in their routing model. A small error, easy to fix early, dangerous if ignored. I spoke calmly, offering a simple correction. Major Barrett smiled, polite but dismissive. "Thanks, Staff Sergeant. We'll handle command decisions up here." No insult in his voice. Just certainty. Certainty can be more dangerous than arrogance. I nodded once, said nothing more, wrote a note in my evaluation log. Around the room, a few officers exchanged small smiles. Not cruel, just casual. They had already placed me in a box in their minds. Support role. Background. Non-command. That was fine, because this was never about proving who I was. It was about seeing who they were when they believed no one important was watching. So I stayed quiet. I observed how they spoke under pressure, how they reacted to mistakes, how they treated voices they believed carried no weight. Every decision, every dismissal, every moment of silence where listening should have lived. And I waited. The first full simulation started just after 8 in the morning simulated time. A chemical plant explosion in a fictional manufacturing town. Wind shifting north. Civilian populations clustered in 3 dense residential zones. Communications unstable. Local law enforcement overwhelmed. Our job was to coordinate evacuation and containment before contamination spread. Major Cole Barrett stepped into the command position without hesitation. His voice filled the room, controlled and sharp. He assigned sectors, designated extraction routes, prioritized perimeter security. On the surface, it looked clean, efficient, confident. Confidence can calm a room. It can also blind it. The digital map updated in real time. Blue markers for response teams, yellow for civilians, red for contamination spread. As Barrett finalized the evacuation corridor for Sector 3, I noticed something shift. Civilian density began migrating east due to simulated panic. The contamination plume adjusted with the wind model. The route he selected would funnel 200 simulated civilians directly toward a secondary exposure zone. It was subtle, the kind of change you catch only if you are watching patterns instead of listening to your own voice. I saw it immediately. Across the table, Captain Ryan DeLuca saw it too. His eyes flickered to the wind model, then back to Barrett. He hesitated. That hesitation lasted less than a second. But in leadership, a second matters. I spoke evenly without urgency. Sir, recommend rerouting Sector 3 south by 2 blocks to avoid secondary plume drift. Barrett didn't turn toward me. His focus stayed on the officers ranked equal to him. We're good, Staff Sergeant. No hostility, just dismissal. The simulation clock ticked down. 30 seconds, 20, 10. Then 0, red markers multiplied across the map. Simulated casualties. The evaluators seated behind the glass partition did not comment. They did not correct. They simply wrote notes. Barrett exhaled slowly, straightened his shoulders, and said, "That's simulation fog. Next iteration will tighten perimeter timing." But it was not fog. It was failure to listen. The room shifted slightly after that. Laughter quieted, not gone, just reduced. Ego protects itself by minimizing damage. The second scenario began after a short reset. This one layered an active shooter situation over a natural disaster response. Flooded streets, damaged infrastructure, communications interference cutting out transmissions mid-sentence. Captain DeLuca assumed command this time. He adjusted his tone, deliberately slower than Barrett, asked for input from his fellow officers, tried to create collaboration. I respected that. But when the pressure increased, old instincts returned. Reports came in fragmented. One team delayed, another requesting clarification. Civilian movement unpredictable due to rising water levels in the model. DeLuca began compressing decisions to maintain tempo. Clarity started slipping. A unit was directed to secure a building already marked, structurally unstable on the secondary data screen. I leaned forward slightly. Sir, recommend redirecting Bravo element to high ground. Structural risk flagged in grid 4. He hesitated. I saw it again. The flicker of recognition. Then he shook his head. We can't lose time. Speed over precision. The clock ran down. The building marker flashed. Red icons replaced blue. Simulated team loss. Additional civilian casualties appeared due to delayed evacuation orders. The room went silent in a different way this time. Not casual silence. Heavy silence. No one laughed. DeLuca stepped back from the table, hands on hips, staring at the board. His jaw tightened. He knew. This time he knew it had not been random. No one acknowledged my earlier recommendation, but a few eyes avoided mine. That told me enough. The evaluators behind the glass continued writing. The lesson was forming. Slowly, These were not incompetent officers. They were intelligent, trained, capable leaders. But intelligence without humility creates blind spots, and blind spots cost lives. Even in a simulation, you could feel the weight of those red markers. I stood at the edge of the table, hands folded loosely behind my back, saying nothing more than necessary. This was not about being right. It was about watching how they responded to being wrong. Would they adjust? Would they invite quieter voices into the next decision, or would they double down? By the end of the second scenario, something subtle had changed in the room. No one was mocking the staff sergeant anymore. They were just no longer sure what they had dismissed. By the third day, the energy inside the command room felt different. No one laughed when I spoke anymore. No one made quiet jokes about the staff sergeant in the corner. But the air had tightened. Pride does not disappear when it is challenged. It hardens. You could see it in the way Major Cole Barrett held himself. A little stiffer, a little less patient. Captain Ryan DeLuca spoke less freely than before. The other officers avoided unnecessary eye contact with me, not out of respect yet, but out of uncertainty. The instructors gathered us that morning and explained the final evaluation. This scenario would combine every weakness exposed so far: civilian density high, communications unreliable, multiple hostile threats layered over infrastructure collapse, conflicting intelligence feeds, rapid timeline compression, in short, controlled chaos. Before the exercise began, Barrett stepped toward me near the edge of the room. His tone was quieter than usual. "Look," he said, keeping his voice low, "I know you've got experience. I can tell. But you're not in the command seat here. Let us run it." There was no insult in his voice this time, just guarded pride. "I understand, sir," I replied. And I meant it, because this was never about taking command from him. It was about seeing what he would do with it. The simulation clock began at 2:17 in the morning. The digital room lights dimmed to simulate nighttime operations. A regional power grid failure triggered rolling blackouts across the fictional city. Communications towers were marked partially disabled. Emergency channels unstable. Reports of hostile actors moving through residential zones exploiting the confusion. Within the first 5 minutes, information began stacking faster than it could be processed. One unit requested clarification on evacuation timing. Another reported visual contact with armed suspects. A third team lost signal mid-transmission. Barrett issued rapid instructions assigning objectives, redirecting teams, trying to stay ahead of the chaos. But the pace became its own problem. Two separate squads were tasked with securing the same grid square. No one noticed the overlap. One evacuation corridor was left uncovered entirely because attention shifted to threat containment. DeLuca caught one error and corrected it, but in doing so, he missed another. Voices began overlapping around the table, suggestions half-spoken, interruptions constant. The system simulated a communications blackout across two sectors. Digital static filled the speakers. Confusion escalated. I stood at the edge of the table and watched the pattern form. Not incompetence, fragmentation. When leaders stopped listening, teams stopped coordinating. A junior officer attempted to clarify a conflicting order. Barrett waved him off. "Stand by, we're handling it." But they weren't handling it. They were reacting. The map shifted again. Civilian clusters began moving unpredictably due to panic in the model. A hostile element advanced toward a crowded shelter zone while attention remained fixed elsewhere. I saw it. So did DeLuca. He opened his mouth to speak, then paused, looking toward Barrett first. Permission seeking. Seconds passed. In real operations, seconds are heavy. I felt the old tension in my chest, the kind that comes before something breaks. Not because they lacked intelligence. Every one of them was trained, educated, capable. But intelligence without disciplined listening creates gaps, and gaps become casualties. The overlapping orders grew worse. Two elements converged unintentionally, clogging a critical evacuation route. Another team waited for confirmation that never came because no one clarified chain of communication once the blackout hit. The instructors behind the glass remained silent. The scenario intensified. Civilian markers flashed as panic spread across the digital grid. A simulated explosion triggered near a hospital zone because hostile movement went unmonitored for too long. The room felt smaller. Barrett's voice grew sharper, shorter commands, less explanation. He was trying to regain control through volume. Volume is not control. DeLuca attempted to coordinate lateral communication between units, but his instructions were drowned out by simultaneous directives. And through all of it, one simple thing was missing. Listening. Not to me, to anyone. I watched it unravel in slow motion. A system not collapsing because of lack of skill, but because of fractured attention. That is far more dangerous than ignorance. Ignorance can be corrected. Ego resists correction. When the simulation introduced a final variable, a secondary hostile unit moving toward a crowded elementary school zone, the room froze for half a second, just long enough to show uncertainty. That was the moment I understood something clearly. This evaluation was no longer about whether they could complete a mission. It was about whether they could recognize their own blind spots before those blind spots cost lives. And as I stood there in a uniform marked staff sergeant, watching command fracture under pressure, I realized the most dangerous threat in that room was not on the digital map. It was the refusal to hear the quietest voice. Halfway through the exercise, just as the situation reached its most unstable point, the lead evaluator's voice cut through the noise from the observation booth. New directive. Staff Sergeant Reese will assume command. The room went still, but not calm. You could feel resistance move through it like pressure before a storm. Major Cole Barrett did not speak, but his jaw tightened and his eyes stayed fixed on the map. Captain Ryan DeLuca shifted his stance slightly, uncertain, watching to see what would happen next. Regulations are regulations. In a controlled evaluation, authority flows from the exercise director, not from pride. I stepped forward. No announcement, no change in tone, no raised voice, just movement. The digital map flickered under low light, red and yellow markers shifting across the simulated city grid. Communications remained unstable. Units were still partially overlapping. Civilian clusters were exposed across multiple zones. A hostile element remained active somewhere near the southern evacuation corridor. Chaos, but not irreversible chaos. I placed both hands lightly on the edge of the command table and began issuing directives. Clear, short, measured. Alpha and Bravo separate. Alpha secure north corridor. Bravo reroute west and reestablish civilian channel. Charlie hold perimeter grid 6. No pursuit. Containment only. Delta confirm communication relay. All units report through single channel. Evacuation priority 1. Civilians first. Repeat, civilians first. Maintain spacing between elements. No overlap. No cross-traffic. 5 directives. Nothing complex. Nothing dramatic. Just structure where fragmentation had existed. For the first time all week, no one interrupted. No overlapping voices. No competing commands, just acknowledgement and execution. On the digital board, movement stabilized. Units separated cleanly. Civilian markers began shifting toward secure zones. The overlapping objectives dissolved. Communication lines, though simulated as unstable, became organized through a single relay path. Within minutes, the chaos began to compress into order. Behind the glass, the evaluator stopped writing for a moment and simply watched. But simulations are designed to test recovery, not comfort. Just as stability returned, the system introduced a final complication. A sudden red alert flashed across the southern evacuation corridor. Simulated ambush, hostile units engaging a civilian convoy moving toward extraction. The board pulsed red. Communication static surged. A team reported taking simulated casualties. Another requested permission to pursue the attackers. The room tensed again, but this time no one spoke over me. I had seconds. 2 options formed instantly in my mind. Pursue the hostile element and neutralize the threat quickly, risking the evacuation corridor remaining exposed, or secure the remaining civilians first, accepting that the hostile force might temporarily escape containment. In simulations, these are decisions. In real operations, these are memories. I have stood beside flag-draped cases. I've watched families receive folded cloth in silence. I have buried teammates who did everything right except trust the wrong priority in one critical moment. So I chose negative pursuit, I said calmly. All units maintain civilian shield. Secure convoy. Reinforce evacuation corridor. Threat containment secondary. No hesitation in my voice. No explanation needed. Captain DeLuca acknowledged first, then the others followed. Units shifted position, forming a protective perimeter around the simulated civilian convoy. The hostile markers moved across the board, but without direct pursuit. They failed to disrupt the extraction flow. One by one, civilian indicators turned from yellow to green. Safe. The ambush subsided as the system recalculated threat movement. Once civilians were fully secured, containment teams repositioned and neutralized the remaining hostile markers with controlled precision. The digital board stabilized. No civilian losses. Minimal simulated team damage. Silence returned to the room, but this silence was different from before. Not heavy, not uncertain, focused. I stepped back from the command table, hands returning behind my back, posture relaxed. I did not look toward Barrett. I did not look toward the evaluators. I simply watched the final markers settle into stillness, because command is not about proving authority in the moment. It is about protecting what cannot be replaced. And I have learned, the hard way, what truly matters when the noise fades. The ambush marker blinked red across the southern corridor, pulsing like a warning heartbeat across the digital map. Civilian convoy icons flickered in yellow, clustered too close to the threat zone. Static rolled through the speakers as simulated radio traffic struggled to stay connected. The room felt tight again, but not chaotic, waiting. Major Cole Barrett stepped forward beside me, voice low but firm. We should neutralize the threat now. I didn't look at him. My eyes stayed on the shifting grid, tracking civilian movement, watching spacing between units, calculating timing. Pursuit would expose the convoy. Exposure creates risk. Risk creates loss. Negative, I said evenly. Secure civilians, first. Threat containment, second. The words settled into the room without force, but they carried weight. No one spoke immediately. Captain DeLuca watched the board, then glanced toward Barrett, waiting to see which direction command would turn. Barrett inhaled sharply. He was not angry, but he was not ready to yield either. His instincts pushed toward action, toward eliminating the visible threat. That is how many leaders are trained. Remove danger first, stabilize after. He began to speak again. We can't let them. That was when I turned slightly, not fully, just enough. And I said it. Unless you outrank a Navy SEAL commander, you will follow my plan. My voice did not rise. There was no edge, no emotion sharpened into it. Just clarity, just truth. The words moved through the room like a shift in gravity. Behind the glass, the evaluators looked up from their clipboards for the first time since the scenario began. Pens paused, eyes fixed. Barrett stopped mid-breath, not because of defiance, because of recognition. In that moment, rank was no longer hidden. Presence was no longer masked. Authority, once silent, stood fully visible without needing to declare itself again. No one in that room outranked me, and for the first time all week, they were not seeing a staff sergeant standing at the table. They were seeing command. No one challenged, no one questioned, no one spoke over the next directive. I returned my focus to the board. Alpha tighten shield around convoy. Bravo extend perimeter south. Charlie maintain overwatch. No pursuit until civilians clear. Acknowledgements came one by one, steady, disciplined, aligned. The convoy markers began moving again, slowly at first, then smoothly as units repositioned with controlled spacing. Hostile indicators shifted across the grid, probing for gaps, but none appeared. The protective formation held. The digital clock ticked down, yellow markers turned green one by one, every civilian secured, no panic movement, no fragmentation, no exposed corridor left unguarded. Only after the final civilian icon cleared the danger zone did I issue the next directive. Containment teams advance. Controlled engagement. Maintain formation. This time, the hostile markers did not break through. They were isolated, surrounded, neutralized with precision once the civilians were no longer at risk. The red alert faded from the board. Silence returned, but it was no longer the silence of uncertainty. It was the silence that follows alignment, when every movement has purpose and no energy is wasted on doubt. The evaluators resumed writing, but slower now, more deliberate. I stepped back from the table, hands resting loosely behind my back, posture unchanged. The board displayed a stable field, no civilian losses, no friendly collapse, minimal simulated damage. Major Barrett remained beside the table for a long moment. He did not look at me right away. When he finally did, his expression was not defensive. It was understanding. Because leadership is not revealed when everything goes right. It is revealed when pressure forces a choice between instinct and responsibility. And in that room, under artificial lights and digital noise, they had seen something they had not expected to see. Not rank, not authority announced, but command carried quietly until the moment it was needed. When the simulation ended, the digital map faded to black and the room lights came back slowly, one row at a time. The hum of the system softened. The static in the speakers disappeared. For the first time in hours, there was no movement on the board, no flashing markers, no artificial chaos demanding decisions. Just quiet. No applause followed. No congratulatory words. This was not that kind of place. The lead evaluator stepped forward from the observation booth, clipboard in hand, expression neutral, voice steady. Leadership assessment complete. No one shifted. No one spoke. Every officer in that room understood the weight of what came next. He began reading the findings. Tactical competence acceptable. A pause. Operational coordination. Satisfactory under controlled structure. Another pause. Slightly longer this time. Ethical leadership under pressure. Inconsistent. You could feel the tension rise again. Not sharp like before, but heavy. Then the final line. Respect toward perceived lower rank deficient. No one reacted outwardly. But silence carries truth louder than any spoken response. Major Cole Barrett stood still beside the command table, shoulders squared, eyes forward. He did not look at me, not out of defiance, not out of avoidance, but because some realizations require inward focus first. Pride does not collapse loudly. It reshapes quietly. Captain Ryan DeLuca, however, turned his head slightly toward me. Our eyes met for only a moment. He gave a single small nod. No words, no apology spoken aloud, no orb zone. That was enough, because the real turning point had not been the sentence I spoke during the simulation. It had been the silence that followed it. Silence forces reflection. Silence removed distraction. In that silence, rank no longer mattered. Ego had no voice. Only truth remained. The evaluator continued, outlining recommendations. Increased integration training between officers and enlisted personnel. Emphasis on listening under pressure. Reinforcement of ethical command responsibility. Structured feedback cycles for decision-making in uncertain environments. Standard language. Formal tone. But everyone in that room knew the lesson was personal. When the report concluded, the evaluator closed his clipboard and said, only one final sentence. Dismissed. Chairs moved softly. Boots shifted against the floor. Officers began gathering their materials, each moving slower than they had entered. No one rushed out. No one spoke loudly. Even the air felt different, like pressure had lifted but left something behind. I remained near the edge of the room, posture relaxed, hands behind my back, saying nothing. Major Barrett finally stepped away from the table. For a moment, it seemed he might walk straight past me. Then he paused, just slightly, without turning fully. Good command, he said quietly. No excuses, no justification, just recognition. Then he walked on. Captain DeLuca passed next. He did not stop, but his voice was low enough that only I heard it. I should have listened sooner. There was no regret in his tone, only understanding. Growth begins there. One by one, the others left the room. Some avoided eye contact, still processing. Others gave brief nods, subtle but sincere. Respect, when real, does not need ceremony. Soon the command room stood nearly empty, the digital board dark, the hum of equipment fading into the background again. I looked once more at the silent table where chaos had lived only minutes before. Because leadership is not proven by being right, it is proven by what others learn when they realize they were wrong. And in that quiet room, under fading fluorescent light, something had shifted, not in rank, not in authority, in understanding. And that kind of change does not need reprimand. It only needs one moment of truth, followed by silence long enough for it to settle. I left Camp Ridgeline that evening as the desert wind moved low across the empty roads outside the base. The sun had already begun to fall behind the dry hills, painting the sky in fading amber. There was no ceremony waiting, no formation, no handshake line, just a quiet exit, the way most real work ends. My role had never required recognition, only results. I carried a small folder under my arm, the official evaluation report sealed and complete. Inside it were not just scores or technical findings, but patterns, observations about listening, about leadership, about how authority behaves when it believes no one is watching. That was the real mission. No one escorted me out. No one escorted me out. No one as men followed my departure. To most of the base, I had simply been another temporary participant finishing a rotation. The staff sergeant who stayed quiet wrote notes and then disappeared. And that was exactly how it was meant to be. A week later, while back at my duty station, an internal message arrived through command channels. Short, routine, but meaningful. Several of the officers from that evaluation had requested additional enlisted integration training for their units. Voluntary, not ordered. They wanted more exposure to junior perspectives during planning and execution phases, more structured listening cycles during high-pressure simulations. That kind of request does not come from obligation. It comes from realization. Later that same day, a separate message reached me. Private channel. From Major Cole Barrett. No long explanation. No defensive tone. Just a short written note. He acknowledged the evaluation findings. He acknowledged his dismissal of input during critical moments. He acknowledged the difference between authority and awareness. And he apologized, direct, simple, without excuse. He did not attempt to justify his decisions. He did not shift responsibility to simulation pressure or incomplete data. He owned it fully. That matters more than perfection ever will, because leadership is not defined by never making mistakes. It is defined by what you do after you see them clearly. I have operated in places where ego was not corrected in time, where pride delayed listening by only seconds, and those seconds cost lives. I have seen missions fracture because one voice was ignored when it should have been heard. I have watched strong teams carry the weight of preventable loss. This was not that kind of battlefield, but the pattern was the same, and patterns, if left unchanged, repeat. What happened at Camp Ridgeline stayed inside a simulation room. Digital casualties, artificial pressure, controlled environment, but the lesson moved beyond it. If one leader begins to listen earlier, if one officer pauses long enough to hear the quiet voice beside them, if one command decision shifts from ego to responsibility, then real lives, somewhere, someday, remain untouched by loss. That is how change works in this profession. Quiet, gradual, carried forward by those willing to adjust. I did not need recognition for that outcome. I did not need acknowledgement beyond what had already been learned inside that room, because the purpose was never to prove authority, it was to shape it. And if 3 days of silence taught a room full of leaders to listen for the rest of their careers, then the mission had done exactly what it was meant to do, not loudly, not visibly, but permanently. People think command is about volume, about who speaks first, about who speaks the loudest when pressure rises and decisions feel heavy. It isn't. Real command lives in the quiet moments, in the pauses between words, in the choice to listen when everyone else is trying to be heard. I did not walk into Camp Ridgeline to expose anyone. I walked in to observe, to understand how leaders behave when they believe the quiet voice in the room carries no weight. Because in real operations, the smallest voice is sometimes the one closest to the truth. On a real battlefield, the specialist standing in the corner might be the first to notice a shift in danger. The medic might see what others overlook. The youngest soldier might recognize the pattern that saves a team. And if a leader has trained themselves not to hear those voices, that mistake does not stay inside a training room. It follows them into real darkness, where consequences are permanent. They believed they were testing a staff sergeant. Instead, they encountered a commander. But rank was never the lesson. The lesson was responsibility. Respect is not built on insignia. It is built on how you carry decisions when no one is watching, when no applause follows, and when silence is the only witness. Subscribe to my channel, Lady Veteran Stories, for more real military stories, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from.